Good day, and welcome to another episode of What's Happening Today, presented to you by Rapido News Network. In our first story, we will discuss the upcoming President Biden's Middle East trip. After that, we will talk about the death of the former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Next, we will talk about Sri Lankan president who has finally agreed to step down. Post that, we will discuss Elon Musk's Twitter deal moves to court after Mr. Musk backed out of it. After that, we will talk about Papaya King, a hot dog pioneer on the Upper East Side, which now faces a possible end. And in our final story, we will talk about the Russian Ukrainian conflict. So let's get started. In our first story, we will discuss that when President Joe Biden leaves on Tuesday night for a 4-day swing through the Middle East, he will presumably be more rested than he would have been had he followed the original plan. The trip was initially tagged onto another journey last month to Europe, which would have made for an arduous 10 days overseas trek until it became clear to Mr. Biden's team that such extended travel might be unnecessarily taxing for a 79-year-old president, or crazy, as one White House official puts. Aides also cited political and diplomatic reason to reorganize the extra stop as a separate trip weeks later. But the reality is that managing the schedule of the oldest president in the American history present distinct challenges. And as Mr. Biden insists he plans to run for a second term, his age has increasingly become an uncomfortable issue for him, his team, and his party. Just a year and a half into his first term, Mr. Biden is already more than a year older than Ronald Reagan was at the end of his 2 terms. If he mounted another campaign in 2024, Mr. Biden would be asking the country to elect a leader who would be 86 at the end of his tenure, testing the outer boundaries of age and the presidency. Polls shows many Americans consider Mr. Biden too old, and some Democratic strategists do not think he should run again. His energy level, while impressive for a man of his age, is not what it was, and some aides quietly watch out for him. He often shuffles when he walks, and aides worry he will trip on a wire. He stumbles over words during public events, and they hold their breath to see if he makes it to the end without a gaffe. Now, in our next story, the body of the former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe arrived at his home city, Tokyo, on Saturday, a day after he was fatally assassinated during a campaign speech in the western Japanese city of Nara. Local media has reported that a night vigil will be held on Monday, and his funeral will be held on Tuesday. Now, in our next story, on the President Gotabaya Rajapaksa of Sri Lanka, whose family has dominated politics in Sri Lanka for much of the past 2 decades, has agreed to resign after months of protests accusing him of running the island nation's economy into the ground through corruption and mismanagement, the Speaker of the country's parliament said on Saturday. Mahinda Yapa Abeyewardena, the parliamentary speaker and an ally of the president, announced the development at the end of a chaotic day. Protesters entered the president's residence and office, and thousand more descended on the capital city of Colombo to register their growing fury over his government's inability to address a crippling economic crisis. As the demonstration swelled, the country's political leaders urged Mr. Rajapaksa to step down. There was no direct confirmation about the potential resignation from Mr. Rajapaksa, who is hiding and who in the past has remained defiant. Mr. Abeyewardena, in a televised statement, said that the president had informed him he would resign on July 13th to ensure a peaceful transition of power. By the evening, Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe, who took office only in May and was also facing demands to resign, said he would step down, saying that he had the safety of all the citizens in mind. Protesters also entered his private home late Saturday and set it ablaze, a spokesman for the Prime Minister said, adding that Mr. Wickremesinghe was not at home when the protesters burnt his house. Sri Lanka has run out of foreign exchange reserves for imports of essential items like fuel and medicine, and the United Nations has warned that more than a quarter of Sri Lanka's people are at the risk of food shortages. Now, in our next story, Elon Musk has signaled his intent to walk away from his $44 billion offer to buy Twitter. The fate of the influential social media network will be determined by what may be an epic court battle involving months of expensive litigation and high stakes negotiation by elite lawyers on both sides. The question is whether Mr. Musk will be legally compelled to stick with his agreed upon acquisition or be allowed to back out, possibly by paying a 10 figures penalty. Most legal experts say Twitter is in the upper hand, in part because Mr. Musk attached a few strings in his agreement to buy the company, and the company is determined to force the deal through. But Mr. Musk reveals in impulsiveness and brinkmanship and is backed by a fleet of top bankers and lawyers. Rather than engaging a protracted public brawl with the world's richest man and his legions of die-hard followers, Twitter might come under pressure to find a swift and relatively peaceful resolution, one that could preserve the company's independence but leave it in a tenuous financial position. Mike Ringler, lawyer who is representing Mr. Musk, informed Twitter late on Friday that his client was abandoning the takeover. Mr. Ringler argued in his letter that Twitter had violated the agreement with Mr. Musk by not providing him with detailed information about how it measures inauthentic accounts. He also said that Mr. Musk did not believe that metric that Twitter has publicly disclosed about how many of its users were fake. Twitter's board responded by saying it intended to consummate the acquisition and would sue Mr. Musk in a Delaware Chancery court to force him to do so. At the heart of the dispute are the terms of merger agreement that Mr. Musk reached with Twitter in April. His contract with Twitter allows him to break off his deal by paying $1 billion in fee, but only under specific circumstances such as losing debt financing. The agreement also requires Twitter to provide data that Mr. Musk may be required to complete the transaction. Mr. Musk has demanded that Twitter give a detailed accounting of the spam on its platform. Throughout June, lawyers for Mr. Musk and Twitter have wrangled over how much data to share to satisfy Mr. Musk's inquiry. Mr. Musk's cold feet about the Twitter deal coincided with the huge slide in the valuation of technology companies, including Tesla, the electric vehicle company he runs, which is also the main source of his wealth. Mr. Musk did not respond to a request for a comment. Now, in our next story, the future of Papaya King, an Upper East Side pair of fast food takeout restaurants in New York City, credited with popularizing New York's quintessential pairing of hot dogs and tropical fruit juice drinks, is in doubt as its building is set to be razed. Excel Development, which last year bought the lot where Papaya King sits for $21 million, filed plan with the city on June 28 to demolish the one-story commercial building. The developer is known for its luxury apartment, including Central Park Tower on Billionaires Row in Midtown. It is unclear when a demolition might take place or when the restaurant might have to vacate the space at the corner of the East 86th Street and 3rd Avenue. Neither Excel nor the people currently running the restaurant would comment. The proposed demolition, reported by Patch, came as an unwelcome surprise last week to Papaya King employees and customers. Now, in our final story on the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, relief at the gas pump, coupled with this past week's news that businesses continue to hire at a blistering clip, have tempered many economists' fear that America is heading into a downturn. But while President Joe Biden's top aide are celebrating those economic development, they are also worried that economy could be in for another serious shock later this year, one that could send the country into a deliberating recession. White House officials fear a new round of European penalties aimed at curbing the flow of Russian oil by year-end could send energy prices soaring again, slamming already beleaguered customers and plunging the United States and other economies into a severe contraction. That chain of events could exacerbate what is already a severe food crisis plaguing countries across the world. To prevent that outcome, US officials have latched to a never-before-tried plan aimed at depressing global oil prices, one that would complement European sanctions and allow critical flow of Russian crude into the global markets to continue, but at a steeply discounted price. Europe, which continues to guzzle more than 2 million barrels of Russian oil each day, is set to enact a ban on those imports by the end of this year, along with other steps meant to complicate Russia's effort to export fuel globally. While Mr. Biden pushed Europe to cut off Russian oil As punishment for its invasion of Ukraine, some forecasters, along with top economic aides to the president, now fears that such policies could result in a huge quantities of Russian oil, which accounts for just under a tenth of the world's supply, suddenly taken off the global market. Analysts have calculated that such a depletion in supply could send oil prices soaring to $200 per barrel or more, translating to Americans paying $7 or more per gallon for a gasoline. Global growth could slam into reverse as consumers and businesses pull back spending in response to the higher fuel prices, as central banks, which are already raising interest rates in an effort to tame inflation, are forced to making borrowing costs even more expensive. The potential for another oil shock to puncture the global economy and perhaps Mr. Biden's re-election prospects has driven the administration's attempt to persuade government and business leaders around the world to sign on to a global price cap on Russian oil. Now that was all for the major news update for July 10th. Stay tuned for our next update on the ongoing world affairs. We hope that you find this video useful. If you like this video, hit like. And for a continued update on what's happening around the world, consider subscribing. To get notified whenever we post something new, hit that bell icon. If you have any comments or any suggestions for us, please let us know in the comment sections below. Thank you.